As we live in a world where content creation dominates, anybody who wants to be a content creator can be a content creator. All they have to do is speak to anybody, to an audience that they carve out and that they build, just like I've done here on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. However, there is a lot to say of in-person conversations that are two-way, because content creation a lot of the times is a one-way sort of street, right? I am talking right now, you are listening, we get to engage after, but during this podcast, there's no real way to interact with me unless you're sitting in front of me or you're sitting in an audience if I'm doing this live, which I rarely do. So when we talk about, building relationships and understanding what questions people have and what people want to know about around ocean conservation, around science, ocean science and marine biology, there's a big push and there's a huge want to be able to talk to people, to sit with people and interact. And today's guest is Paola Espitia, who's on the show to discuss her experience in communication and building a career in science communication, as well as oceans, and being able to interact with people on cruise lines, to be able to provide lectures, have dinner with them. This is an amazing story, and it really turned on the light bulb in my head, because I really wanted to know more about how I can interact with more people in the flesh to be able to not only grow my podcast audience, but have more conversations that are two-way conversations to get feedback from people right away about what I'm saying and what the questions that I can answer from them right live, right then and there. We're going to talk about more about that and hear from Paola on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. This is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And today we're going to be focusing in on science communication, because my wonderful guest, Paola Espitia, is here to talk about science communication and her business, Ola'pi Creative, that is designed to work with people to tell better stories, to help them with their conservation marketing, and to be able to connect with people better. And she just drops a ton of value bombs in this episode, just talking about how to connect with people, why going on cruise lines and being able to talk about marine conservation and science is an important thing, and what she learned about that, how she can help people tell stories and where she learned to tell stories, how she got into videography, and just a whole bunch of things that are really, really valuable. I think there is a lot to say for the new age communicator in science. More and more I see advertisements for communications managers, communications directors, and I think they're really important. I think it's something that's going to be a bigger business than we all think, and having scientists to be able to be in those roles is going to be really important, and conservationists is going to be really important. We're talking all about that with Paola. Here's the interview with Paola Espitia on science communication and the ocean. Enjoy, and we'll talk to you after. Hey, Paola, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about ocean and science communication?
Andrew, this is my favorite topic. I cannot wait to dive in.
I love it. I love it. I'm super excited about this podcast. I found you on LinkedIn. Our paths crossed, our news feeds crossed, and I immediately reached out to you and I was like, hey, would you like to come on the podcast and talk about not only your conservation journey, but just sort of the work that you do, because you have a goal of working with 1,000 ocean professionals to help them to be better communicators. And I love that, because that's needed. I mean, we all know that I need help. Everybody needs help. I've been doing this for 9 years and I still need help. But, there's always ways to improve, and it's always great to get perspectives from other people and professionals who have been doing this for a long time. So we're going to find out sort of how you came across like science communication and your media agency and all this wonderful stuff. And just sort of from the beginning, we're going to start that. But before we do and have all that fun and talk about science communication, I would love for you to just kind of introduce yourself to the audience and just let us know who you are and what you do.
It is such a treat to be here. I've been listening to this podcast for several years now, because you are far and few between. So I appreciate so much of the content that you're putting out there, and it's a real treat and privilege to be here. So thank you.
Awesome. You're welcome.
Well, hello out there, friends. I am one of you. I literally started, I fell in love with the ocean at a very young age, which is kind of unusual because my life actually started up in the Andes Mountains of Colombia. I was born in Bogota, Colombia, and it was during a time that was somewhat turbulent in the early 80s, and so we had to leave the country. But the big joke was that we moved from Colombia, South America, to Columbia, Maryland. It was, we couldn't stay away. But it
Gotta
actually,
stay with the roots.
yeah, it was a big deal, though, because Columbia, Maryland happened to be a planned city, which meant that within the different villages in the city, there are also community pools in every sector. And so I became a swimmer right off the bat. And I loved being in my bathing suit every single day. That's all it was my only joy. By the time I was 8 years old, I came across reruns of Jacques Cousteau's Undersea World. And that was the trigger. That was the thing that opened up my eyes to the idea that not only could I have a job where I could wear my bathing suit every day, but I could also be in the water, helping the ocean, learning about these ocean animals. And, it was very significant. So I already knew at a young age I was going to be a marine biologist. By the time I was 18, I had worked at public aquariums across the country, National Aquarium in Baltimore, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, even Ocean's Journey, which was an aquarium in Denver, Colorado. That was the only way I could live in Colorado and be a marine biologist. So I was working at the aquarium there. And, it was wonderful. But I still knew I wanted to go to grad school. So by the time I was 28, I earned my Master's of Science in Marine Biology and Coastal Zone Management. And I was a coral scientist. So my role was to go out scuba diving on the coral reefs every day, doing health assessments, monitoring restoration efforts that we were doing there in Fort Lauderdale. And it was a dream. It was exactly what I had envisioned marine biology to be like. And I was there doing it. I found myself, though, one day on Fort Lauderdale Beach, and I had, my certificate, my Master's of Science in one hand. I had thousands of words, written in scientific publications and reports. I had hundreds of hours underwater as a scuba diver. But yeah, I realized, looking around me at the beach on Fort Lauderdale, that nobody around me, between locals and tourists, had any idea that within swimming distance from shore was the country's only barrier coral reef right there. And that's when I realized that although I was doing important work, it wasn't quite enough. And that's when the shift happened. I ended up looking the shift. And I ended up falling into this world of, realizing that I had to use my voice in order to make the impact I was looking for. And I found myself in a situation where I just happened to be speaking to the right person at the right time, saying, all I want to do is talk about the ocean to interesting people in inspiring places. And next thing I knew, he says, would you like to speak on our stage on this world-class cruise ship and be our onboard marine biologist? I was like, what does that mean? What are you saying to me? And that was it. That was literally the next shift that happened, was that I became this speaker at sea. And, I've since traveled over 30,000 nautical miles around the world as a marine biologist on these cruise ships. And it's been an incredible voyage, literally, but also such a neat experience. And especially as far as, understanding what makes the general public tick. What is it that they know or don't know? And what gets them engaged around these conversations around conservation. So that became a really insightful experience. It still continues to be an insightful experience. I still get a chance to, I'm going up to Alaska in August with Lindblad Expeditions and their Nat Geo trips. So it's still a whirlwind, and I love that part of what I do. But I also have gotten a chance to apply those communication skills as a videographer and a media producer. My husband and I created the media agency Ola'pi Creative. His name is Pi. So between Paola and Pi, we are Ola'pi Creative. And
love that name, by the way. I love that name. Sorry to interrupt, but that, because when you look at it spelt out, you would never guess that. Even knowing both of your names, you'd just be like, wow, that's such a cool name. Where's it come from? And then what you mentioned, it's just awesome. And Ola is like wave, isn't it? So many meetings. I love it. Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry. My fault.
No, it just goes to show it's, I love it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing the excitement, because that was the whole point. But, it also just goes to show just how very intentional we are in the work that we're doing. So we ended up, teaming up, and we help organizations, scientists, nonprofits become better communicators by offering experiences that involve video workshops, that involve video production, and as well as actually curating workshops and experiences that connect people to water, whether it's through in-person events or through these video marketing experiences. So through that, we have really had the opportunity to get a chance to work with a lot more organizations who are making an impact for the ocean. And we, at the end of the day, are just trying to help everyone, all the scientists out there, become better communicators. Because I know in grad school, and when I went to school, there happened to be one communications course. It was grant writing, and it served its purpose, but it wasn't quite there to reach the general population and the wider public. And so in this way, through Ola'pi Creative, through this media agency, we truly are making a ripple effect as far as training other people and helping them produce media that moves.
That's amazing. I kind of want to go back to the cruise ship talks that you were given, and it's a lot more than talks. We were talking just before we pressed record, and can you talk a little bit about the experience there? So it's not, what I always thought it was, somebody would, you would go up and you would be hired by these companies, and you would go and you do like a lecture maybe 2 or 3 times a day to a group of people, however many, depending on the size of the room that you were in. But you were kind of mentioning it's a little bit more than that. It's a little bit more engaging and interactive. Can you just kind of elaborate on that and tell the audience?
Absolutely. I mean, it truly is a very dynamic role to serve. It's not entirely for everybody, because you very much are considered on, It's a beautiful position in the sense that these passengers get a chance to have real access to marine scientists, to geologists, to experts in the field. And so for them, it's a real treat. But then for us, for the science side, it's a real opportunity for us to reach an audience that is outside of what we normally experience, and that is the inner circle. Mm-hmm. We are constantly, we as far as scientists, research, are constantly talking to one another in this bubble. And we don't realize exactly just how shut off our communications have become as a result of that, day-to-day interaction within our inner circle. But in this scenario, you are not only giving your presentations, but you're also having meals with passengers, you're enjoying a drink with passengers. And in some cases, for instance, with the Lindblad Expeditions, you are also leading expeditions. We're zooming through on zodiacs looking for wildlife. We are kayaking amongst icebergs. We are hiking through bear country with the specific goal of finding these incredible elements of nature that connect people to the environment and really make it a very immersive experience. And so it is a very dynamic role, because you're not just scientists. You are in some ways, somewhat the center of attention, which is exhausting and draining, but it's such a cool opportunity to get to know what these people in the outer circle know, understand, and care about when it comes to conservation.
I think that's the big one for me. That's what really made me switch from more of a science career, working with government or nonprofit organization, and working more with people. Everybody's different in your interaction. Everybody comes up with different points. Sometimes they come up with some great points, in terms of like, hey, I understand we need to go towards, as an example, renewable energy, but the reality is this. And you're like, yes, you're right. And you can have a really good conversation, but as a scientist, you're almost like you're getting fed data, back from people, and you're like, okay, I'm processing this data, and this is what this type of this group feels about, marine conservation, let's just say, and this is what this other group, feels, and you can put it almost like in target markets or different sort of like older generation, younger generation, sort of like the Gen X and Gen Z and all those different generations, and just sort of the genders and people from different cultures, and you get all this data back, and you're starting to you must have gone interacted with tens of thousands of people over your career just doing that specifically. What did you get out of? I know it's hard to just say, hey, tell me in one sentence of what you got out of it, but What was sort of your biggest aha moment, when interacting with the variety of people that you did?
Yeah, I mean, and even to add to the differences is even regionally, here in the United States, when we have more Californians on board versus more people from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania versus, people from Florida, for instance, you hear in the minute differences in the way that we have conversations. Again, I get a chance to have these intimate conversations with people at dinner. And one of the biggest lessons I learned right off the bat was how deeply it's sad, but how deeply we can go into discussions around climate change. If I'm talking about glaciers, do I lead with glaciers receding or do I lead with glaciers formation? A big thing that I have learned, even during some of those conversations, coral bleaching, and talking about the causes of climate change, and having people in the audience stand up and point at me and say, but that's not it. You can't prove it's people, starting to get somewhat combative. And then that becomes like, I've had to like settle down the audience from having a fighting match over like one little thing that I had mentioned. So, imagine I did not repeat that.
You learn from that. Yeah.
That dynamic. Exactly. So instead, one of the things that I've learned that has been so incredibly valuable is that when you come into an audience, especially one that you may not be familiar with, and especially with one that's in the outer circle, it's not one that's, your colleagues, one of the most important things you can do is set up agreement. And so I oftentimes, I'm in a scenario where I get to actually curate the conversation over a week's cruise. And I don't start with the most controversial topic necessarily. I actually start with something that is much more agreeable. I actually start with the Blue Mind conversation. And we are on a cruise ship, surrounded by water, having the privilege to see, hear, feel, and be in awe of our surroundings. And when I point that out as my first conversation, everybody, no matter their background, their religion, their region from where they're from, they all come up to me at some point during the cruise then afterwards and have a story to share about their connection to water, or maybe their fearful element to water, and that being on the cruise ship is a big deal for them, and that they're going to take advantage and see that experience very differently. Suddenly, they have a real shift in who they see the presenter as. I also have the dynamic of being, a middle-aged blonde woman showing up as their expert marine biologist with, some of these older populations is not their vision of a expert marine biologist. And so I have that little added element to get through. But when I start with this presentation of agreement that is just very much targeted to, don't we all feel good around water? We can all say that. Then I have people tuning into every conversation I have the rest of the cruise ship because of that simple element of making sure we establish agreement right off the bat so that they know, look, people like us do things like this. Come with me and listen more. It's
so true. I mean, obviously the Blue Mind sort of effect. Actually, can you just kind of go into what Blue Mind is? I've explained it before, but for the people who don't know, can you just talk about what Blue Mind is, and then I'll ask some questions based on what you just said after.
Sure thing. We are so lucky to have Dr. Wallace J. Nichols in our lives as the person to dive deeper into the feeling, the notion that we all share of this connection to water. Of course, all of us who are in this field because we fell in love with the ocean right away. And turns out there's new science that is explaining all of the different sensory elements that not only make us feel good, but also help to calm us, help to relieve our stress hormones, help to, really elevate our lives. And so I use this now in my conversations because for so long as marine conservationist, I've spoken about the ecological value of water, and that, gets some people to perk up. Then I talk about the economic value of water, and that, gets more ears to pop up. But when we talk about Blue Mind science, and we're able to use that to actually discuss the emotional and the well-being, the benefits of water that pull those in, suddenly more people become involved in the conversation because it's a much more universal level of agreement. And so because of learning about Wallace J. Nichols' research, him teaming up with neurologists to come up with neural conservation and to have this science that exists for us, I use that all the time now as my initial connector piece to reach outside audiences.
And it's so true too, especially when you think about people on cruise ships. Like, why did you come on a cruise ship? Almost even asking that question right off the bat. It's because I want to be around water. Well, you are. You're literally on water all the time. And of course, even just going like, why do we want to always go to a beach, or when we go on vacation, or want to lie by the water? Or it's so profound, yet so simple too, right? If you think about it, that idea of blue mind has always been around us, and it took Jay to write a book about it for all of us, even as scientists, to just be like, he's so right. Like, it's such an easy way to connect with people, instead of being like, hey, climate change is here and we're screwed. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's just,
there's a little more doom and gloom in that narrative.
Right. 100%. It's really interesting, because there was a show a while ago. I think it was called, it was with Jeff Daniels, Newsroom, I think it was called. It was a pretty big show at the time. I think it was on HBO or one of those. And Jeff Daniels played like a broadcaster, almost like a CNN type of thing. And he had this expert that was an expert on climate change. This is in 2013, 2012. And he asked the character, he's like, so, what can we look for hope, in terms of battling climate change? And the scientist was like, oh, no, we're screwed. Like, there's nothing. We could have done something like 30 years ago and we'd be okay, maybe. But now, like, yeah, we're like fires, all this kind of stuff. And you look at it in today's comparison, you're like, okay, yeah, I see that. But to lead off with that, and he kept saying, where's the hope? Like, everybody wants hope, And then there's that other movie that just came out with Jennifer Lawrence and Leonardo DiCaprio, just Don't Look Up.
Don't Look Up.
Don't Look Up, right? And you talk about sort of natural disasters, and everybody's like, I just want the entertainment. I just want I just want to be entertained all the time and not think of the heavy stuff. And it's true, like, and scientists, we lead with the information first, right? And as we've seen, like, Don't Be Such a Scientist. Randy Olson came out with that book, Don't Be Such a Scientist. Don't talk to the brain, talk to the emotions, like, talk to the stomach, and you get all that information. You try and like you said, just connect with people right off the bat. And I think that's such an important aspect, to get that agreement. They're like, you like water, I like water. Yes. Okay. You get that. Yes. Right off the bat. Okay. Why is it important to you? Because I'm sure every time you've asked that question, it's going to be you're going to get a different answer. And even if you go within the audience, why is it so important to everybody? And you've already mentioned a lot of the values and benefits, but it's such a profound effect. And I just think it's interesting for you as going on and doing a lecture and engaging with people and just getting different backgrounds and dealing with misinformation and things like that. It definitely makes you a better communicator on the fly, as you go along, right? So that's a huge thing,
especially on the fly, because one of the hardest pieces is you have your set presentation, but like, oh shoot, you realize, you look around the room and maybe it's a lot of veterans, or maybe it's people from these specific experience that you don't have, like, that you're very disconnected from. And so there have been many times that I've had to shift my presentation or quickly fill in a different piece, so that way I can make sure that I'm still connecting.
Which makes it exciting for you as well. You're not just doing the same talk over and over and over again, and having those interactions, like at dinner and stuff, when people are asking you probably some pretty good questions, where people are just, they don't know, they don't have the information.
The information that they're getting too is, very much from the media. And, this also plays so much to the point that as scientists, it still is very crucial for us to have a say in what's getting put and published out in media. Because especially with the headlines, the negativity that's out there, right now, the latest conversations that I was having on the ship were about the wind turbines. They're a bad idea because, now they're impacting the fishermen and then the fisher folk. Oh, and what about the whales? And it is a very complicated issue, but heck, like, now we can't just poo-poo on wind turbines either. That's not the solution. So exactly. It becomes very dynamic.
And I think a lot of people, what they don't realize is how complex a lot of these solutions can be. Like, the ocean is used by a lot of different people, and a lot of times it's in the same region. And so you almost have to pick what's the best thing right now. Are wind turbines perfect? No. just like electric vehicles. Are they perfect? No, but we're getting better with them, and they're the better solution to the alternative, which is what we've been doing for, however long. And so, I think people need to realize that when they first put in, it's like, yes, there are some issues that we have to deal with, and we have to be careful, and that's what regulations are for. But, the overall perspective is it's better, overall for the environment. It's better for our planet. And I think once you get people to realize that, it's like, yes, this isn't perfect. We're not saying it's perfect, but we're hoping it gets better. And with innovation, we've already seen it get better. So it's on a good track to do that. So I find in my conversations, people start to come around, and they could be the very most, depending on, they could be very against at the beginning. And I find it's not that I'm convincing, but I can get them to just be like you said, agree, be like, okay, I see your point there. I got, you got me there kind of thing, but it's not a gotcha game. It's more of a, hey, this is what's happening and this is why we're doing it, kind of thing. So I love that. I think you have so much experience just from those talks, and those experiences that it makes sense why you've become like a communication strategist. So how did that, from the lectures, did you already have the company with your husband at that time? Is that what kind of brought that on, or did that happen after sort of those opportunities?
That was actually simultaneous. And in the beginning, our focus was more so on video production and, gotcha, helping with clarifying messaging. But since having had the experiences then with general audiences, I was then able to actually hone in more so on how to give tips and training that's more so geared towards better communication for scientists to reach these people. And, right, we still, of course, do a lot of the video production, but even before you produce any kind of video, you have to have a clue. You have to have a little bit of a strategy to understand, why are you making this content? Who is it for? And what's really going to resonate in that content? And so that has become a really big piece, of course, that we start with when we work with our clients. And so in a big sense, when we get hired to do video production, we also give the opportunity to help with clarifying messaging and, really getting to the root of what their actual origin story can be. And that is a whole lot of fun. And there's, been a lot of elements in marketing that we've needed to incorporate in conservation messaging in order to actually, get this work across. That's, when you think about it, we were talking earlier that in grad school, there just hasn't been a lot of communication courses. But yet, meanwhile, in the world of marketing, we have been convinced to buy brown sugar water and love it. So why can't we convince people to, shut the water off in between brushing their teeth, or right, bring in those bags, the reusable bags to the grocery store more often? So there is such an opportunity for us to be learning from not only communication, but also through marketing, through the science of persuasion, to really help create the behavior change that at the end of the day, as conservationists, we're truly after.
And that's what it really is. It's behavior change, right? You're communicating the message, but for a reason. It's to try and get people to just, like, for me, my goal is to get people just to think about the ocean in their daily lives. So the next time they pick up, like they're at the convenience store and they're thirsty, it's like, oh, here's a plastic water bottle, which is very convenient. I'm not going to say it's not. It's light, it's easy to, travel with and stuff, but it's not good for the environment. So just think about that when you go to, buy that, or when you leave the house the next time, maybe just carry a reusable water bottle that you can fill up wherever. Now there's probably like in North America anyway, there's usually filling stations around wherever you go. And so, like, I think it's just more of that, right? It's that behavior change, but it's difficult to change people's behavior because we hate change. We see that in everyday life. We hate change. So from when you teach, other ocean professionals to sort of get to that point, what are the factors that help change those behaviors?
Well, first of all, I like to start with 3 very simple questions. And when we're tailoring this kind of communication to impact behavior change, we need to first know, what is the goal for the audience we're trying to reach? Are we trying to get funding, or are we trying to reduce plastic water bottle consumption? Then after we identify the what is that goal for that audience? And that also is a twofold, because you're identifying the audience. You then want to ask, so what? Why does it matter to them? That's something that I think we overlook often because, again, in the inner circle, we're like, duh, this is a big deal because this is our only planet, of course.
Yeah.
But again, we have to be speaking in the language of the people we're trying to reach. And so we have to truly understand what their motivation is. And then after we have a better idea of that, then finally we ask, now what? That is the other big opportunity that is missed in science presentations, science communication, even sometimes on social media. We're so good about talking about the issues of impacting the ocean, but yet we don't give anybody action steps on how to follow up or, where they can sign. These are very basic things, but these are basic elements of marketing, not science communication. And so no wonder we don't know about it because I don't know that there's many programs that involve a cross-disciplinary conservation and marketing type of curriculum. And so simply by starting off with asking yourself before you make any kind of content, what, so what, and now what, already, boom, you start speaking in a much more actionable sense. And now you're having more of an influence on the people you're speaking with.
That makes sense. And that's, it's interesting. I just did a training on how to speak to professionals in my other job. And that was what they used, the what, so what, and now what, to sort of get a response from somebody and help them through the process. It's like, here's the problem, why is it important? And then how do you go about getting the solution, the what, so what, and now what? It's so effective. You think about when somebody tells you this is a simple process. It's just a matter of putting it into practice over and over and over again, right? And so for communicators, people who want to become better communicators, what do you recommend in terms of the practice if they don't, say, have a podcast or interact with a lot of people right off the bat and they want to do that more? What would be the next step?
Media is actually really fun because it's all about experimentation. I didn't know that I would have a knack for video until I started making videos. You may not have known that you would have had a knack for podcasting until you actually tried it. And even true. This is so true for, our career as marine scientists. I'm not sure about you, but, I did so many internships and volunteered to get a sense for what is exactly, the field of marine science I wanted to dive into. We weren't all going to be dolphin trainers. So it really is about, experimenting, trying out different forms of media. And you never know where you're going to be really good at, what you're going to shine at. But of course, you probably are all very well versed at writing. That is a big part of our role just as researchers. So just start writing. Sometimes, even just doing blog posts is a great way to get information out there. And then later, when you start getting up a little bit more boldness, you can then use the topics from your podcast or even as your blog as a script to make that video. You can always go back and reuse the content you've already created, like I said, those blog posts or other social media posts, to then create a new type of content, but utilizing the same concepts from what you've already made. So I say, go out and experiment, try all different kinds of things, and don't be afraid. The neat thing is now with these very short form video clip opportunities that we have between Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn, YouTube Shorts, especially Instagram and Facebook, play with the stories. Stories only last 24 hours. And so you feel like you made a horrific story. It's going to disappear. Nobody will ever even know. But at least you've gotten the practice, and you will not become better until you get that practice in. They say you need 10,000 hours to become really, really good. Well, start pushing them out.
I agree. I think a lot of people, they hit a barrier. There's a couple of barriers when they start to even think about experimenting. It's the fear of what people are going to think, the fear of getting critiqued, online. Online can be a very negative place, as you well know. And I think a lot of people will stop just off the fear of that. I know it took me a year to publish my first podcast because I was afraid of what other scientists would say. And then I found out that other scientists like it and they want to be on the show, and you're like, oh, okay, so this is actually something that's really, that's really beneficial to me. I think also, what I've heard other scientists say is there's no incentive for them to do this type of work, to do science communication in their job. They don't get paid extra. They don't get extra time to do it. And I think you have to realize that when you first start, it's going to be on your own time. You're not going to get necessarily paid for it unless you're in an extremely good, sort of relationship with somebody that could provide that funding. It can be a big step forward to do that work. And it is a lot more work than probably people expect, even to do a podcast, or even, I'm sure, probably to do a video. When you first started doing videos, you probably thought, oh, wow, this is more than I expected. But you're right. It just takes that extra little, you just start chipping off, sort of new things and trying new things, and being okay with making fun of yourself as you're watching these things, as you're editing the videos or podcasts and stuff, and be like, oh, I can't believe I just said that, or whatever, or I can't be like, I don't know about you, Paola, when I edit video, every time I stop to like make a marker or like to cut a thing, I look at the video of where I stop, and like one eye's closed, one eye's half open. There's no pupils. The face is in a different, and it's hard to watch. This is like,
totally, this is totally part of it. It's totally part of it. And, it's at the end of the day, it's what humanizes us, right? We have to remember that. But, a big thing that I tell people about, showing up on camera and getting over that hump is it's all about your perspective. And remember, you're causing the world a disservice when you do not share the information that you are, especially as marine scientists, we are so passionate about the work that we do. We do this for a reason, because we fell in love with this. We're definitely not, part of the 1% up there necessarily, but we have a passion for this. And when we don't share the work that we're doing and the world that we're a part of, we do the world a disservice. Even like the simplest things that we can be doing, as far as like, I've heard those comments about, I don't have the time, I don't get paid enough to do this. Who's going to see it? My boss doesn't support this. Well, again, it's about not creating necessarily something new, but simply documenting what you're already doing. And when you see it in that way, it becomes fun, and actually becomes maybe even like part of like the journaling experience, the literal scientific documentation of the work that you're doing, which is going to be valuable within the community. And, the whole idea of, oh, my colleagues are going to be, make fun of me. I want to say so many things about that, but we are not here to live for the old. We are here to make a radical change. This is the UN Decade of the Ocean. If not now, then when? It is totally our opportunity to stand up, to have a voice, to document what we're doing, to share the worlds that we were part of. Because if we don't care enough to show about this, then how are they going to care about, this world, to care enough to help us preserve it, restore it, and bring it back? This is what it's all about. If because of social media and because of where we are now, we have such an opportunity to really share this underwater world with the rest of the world. And I cannot just say enough and support you all in your effort to do so, no matter what that looks like. Dive in, get your feet wet, and at the end of the day, it's a lot of fun. And you never know where it's going to lead.
And I am a true testament to that. When I started, I just wanted to get the message out, and then I've had job opportunities from it. I've been on TV because of it. I've been flown to places to cover, conferences. It's you just never know what opportunities will come up and present in front of you, and you'll probably never guess. You'd be like, I never would have guessed that one that came up to me. That opportunity that was presented to me. So it's always interesting. But the true thing for me is staying with your value, your mission of why you're doing this. Right? I find that's the key. You can go all over the place. You can talk about pretty much anything you want. But it's always stick with that. Why are you doing this? And for me, it was just like, I just want people to know something that they probably would have never found out otherwise. Like, if I didn't put it on my platform, whether it be through an interview, whether it be something that I covered, I want people to kind of learn. And if I can change one person's behavior, just one person, then that's the goal, right? Every episode is just to be like that one person, and I always ask for feedback from people. It's like, what'd you think? And sometimes I get great feedback. Sometimes I get, oh, well, I think you could have done better on this episode. Okay, cool. I'll try and do better next time, but that's the goal, is just to kind of keep that one person to change their behavior. And then I've done my job. So, But, there's a lot of, I see a lot of people these days, especially people who like, I guess it's the Gen Z, even millennials, who have grown up with technology, who've grown up with social media. And so they are used to it. It's like a second nature to them compared for us, let's just say, as we see another platform pop up where you and I don't know about you, but I know me, I'm like, oh, I got something new to realize I got to do. Okay. I'll learn TikTok or I'll learn this stuff. But, a lot of the younger generation, they're using this on a regular basis to communicate with their friends and to do all this wonderful things that they do. And so I'm starting to see more and more people use that platform for science communication, for marine conservation communication. Are you seeing the same thing? Do you notice that as well?
Yeah, I'm actually seeing a lot more even job opportunities pop up that are heavily focused on virtual communications, on web content, on even design, of course inclusion and communication for inclusion and indigenous voices, lifting all of those up. That is a beautiful way that we're seeing communication really start to rise and get a little bit more attention. I realize the funding is still somewhat lacking, but once people start, organizations, researchers start realizing that because of their communications efforts, more funding agencies are understanding what their goals are and giving them money, I think that's, that is always going to be the motivating factor. And so that's what y'all have to remember out there, is that by putting your story out there in a way that is memorable, that is clear and concise, that is a very easy way to get picked up for funding. Because if you don't have clarity in the work that you're doing, then how's anybody going to know how to be able to support you? So that becomes a really big exclamation point behind why we need to become better communicators.
Absolutely. And you're right. More and more organizations are, advertising for communications directors, communication managers, hosts and hostesses of video podcasts and podcasts. You're starting to see that more and more. The realization is there, using the technology to get to their constituents is a very important part. I do think funding's getting there. We're headed towards the right direction. Definitely not where it needs to be especially for independent science communicators and whatnot. And I almost feel like some of those funders should start looking for some of the people who are have already established audience and, being able to support them better to up their game a little bit more so that they can reach more people and do some better things. That would be really cool. But I feel like, the people that you work with today, that are ocean professionals, what type of help are they looking for? Are they beginners, like haven't started to launch on their platform of choice? Or are they people who have just kind of started and maybe you would call them like intermediate to try and get them to the next level? Where are they at in terms of their science communication journey?
I have had the pleasure of training the gamut of that. And, some of those people include people who are involved in fellowship opportunities, who need a professional development opportunity. And so I come in and help them in their communications training so that they can better talk about the work that they're doing as part of their fellowship, which then gets published in a video and on the website. I've also worked with even ambassadors, through the United Nations, who are representatives from around the world doing different works in getting women more involved in aquaculture, or getting increasing a crab aquaculture system in Italy, for instance. And they have the science background, but yet because they don't have any, role models, or they don't have any understanding of how to start a YouTube channel that's going to increase ocean literacy in their area, I help them create their YouTube channel, for instance. And then I've worked with bigger organizations whose original goal is to create a video production for a gala event, for a fundraising event. But before we even can dive into that video production with them, we go in and do a media training to understand what is the story they want to tell, how can we help them better clarify that story, and what will be the visual representation of that story. And so in that way, We get a chance to go in and help them create the pre-production story framework for the video. We also produce the video, and then we help them optimize and distribute that video so they can see the funds that they're looking for.
And do you find a lot of people are successful after that, or more successful after that training and getting those funds, or even just being able to communicate? They feel better about communication?
Oh yeah, I mean, certainly confidence just shoots up because they have clarity. Clarity builds so much confidence. And, especially when, from our scientific perspective, we know that our issues that we deal with are so incredibly complex, and there's a multitude of solutions that need to happen. But this actually hinders us as communicators, because when we start bringing up all the problems, then the people we're talking to don't know how to help us with the one solution. So even just being able to help people clarify what is the one thing for this particular group that you're targeting for this particular project, just being able to do that alone becomes so incredibly valuable for the people that we work with. There's a saying, a fish doesn't know it's in water. And that's what happens in our community. We don't know we're talking jargon. We don't know why people aren't giving us donations, because we don't realize that we're not being clear in the one thing we need help with. And then, then there's been really neat side stories that have come out of this, in the sense where the ripple effect has happened, where I've trained somebody who happened to later go and work with a cohort of students who were pitching for a major prize to fund ocean, debris removal. And because they heard her version of my training, they became better storytellers. And it was like, she trained 4 of the 5 groups, and her trainees all got funded for that project because we were able to share the background of their project in a way that was story driven, clear, concise, and memorable. And so, I mean, even just story training, how do you use story in science? We're definitely not trained to do that. And I think originally, like most people, scientists kind of cringe at the idea of creative writing, creative speaking, that's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be these science communicators and be taken very seriously in a sense. But the reason why we need to understand how to incorporate these elements of story is because that's how our brain works. And if we can speak in the formula that our brain can easily understand, then our audiences will remember what our message was and will know how to support us. So those very basic things, for the marketing community, for instance, that's what they practice all the time, are very foreign to the conservation community. And so that's why it's been, a chore in understanding where do I need to look to train in order to bring those concepts from other disciplines into the conservation community so that we can truly advance the narrative and advance restoration initiatives throughout all these programs.
I 100% agree. What great success stories that you just talked about. That's amazing to see people being able to be successful after taking just a little training, that can help them. And like you said, storytelling is such a big thing. We are a species of storytellers. That's what we do. It doesn't matter what culture you're from. There's just stories that you remember since you were children, since you were a kid, and you probably pass it on to the next generation, and you tell stories, and that's what captivates people. I think we often forget that, and just throwing data and results and information is not as exciting as the interpretation of that information into a story and how that could have gone on. And I know there's been I remember attending Ocean Online conferences where people got to practice on stage telling their field stories, field work stories on stage and practicing. And it was so much fun to hear everybody's sort of interpretations of their field work and what stories came about from the field. And that's what is exciting about marine biology, is the adventures that you have, as scientists, and how you can bring those adventures to the public that want to hear what it's like to be a marine biologist. Because, Paola, I don't know about you, but when I tell people I'm a marine biologist, everybody's like, a lot of people are like, I want to be a marine biologist when I was a kid, and they come up with some excuse of, but I knew I wasn't going to make money and blah, blah, blah. And, but I think, I think it's really cool. Do you have that same experience when you tell people you're a marine biologist?
All the time. And then they bring up the Seinfeld episode.
Yes.
I'm a marine biologist. Totally. That happens every single time. And, I'll tell you about that too. Like people who work in the field, marine biologists, park rangers. Park rangers are also, they're full of really rich stories. And we become so fearful of sharing some of those stories, but especially when you're talking to the outer circle, how powerful is it to start your interaction with the audience, sharing the story of why you fell in love with the research that you do. You suck them into your worlds, and they're glued into the rest of what it is you have to say. So, in that way, story is very powerful, and we have so many stories up our sleeves, so we should not be afraid of sharing stories. Now, maybe we need like a beer or two before we share them. Maybe that's the problem. We're not a pub.
True that, but I think also when you think about telling those stories from a scientist perspective, and from a scientist, like that scientist communicating or that conservationist communicating, there is this perception of scientists in the media right now that we're all elitists. We all think we're better than everybody else. What we say goes. And I find through my experience of doing interviews with people such as yourselves and other people that have been on this podcast, people start to feel like, hey, I've got this really cool, person here who's passionate about the ocean, who loves the ocean and is personable. I get along. I can connect with this individual. I love this person and the passion they bring in the stories. Like they're funny, they're quirky, they're nerdy, they're geeky, whatever that might be. I can get on board with what this person's saying, and they become fans of that scientist. And a lot of people that I've talked to who listen to the podcast who aren't scientists are just, wow, that person, I thought they would be really like snobby and elitist, but they're not. And I'm like, no, they don't make that much money. So how can they be elitist? You know what I mean? Like they enjoy their job so much so that they'll wear shirts with sharks on it, that they'll wear shirts with fish on it. That's how much we enjoy. I have those shirts, I know it. I know it, but that's the passion that comes. And I think that communication brings that, right? Do you find bringing a little bit of your personality into that communication really helps connect with the audience?
Oh, 1,000%. And actually, that's another reason why I think starting with a story that connects people to your personal story makes for such a great, a starter to these presentations, because oftentimes, you may be nervous to speak to a group that's not your traditional audience, that aren't your fellow colleagues. And so by starting in that way, I find that it actually really helps to calm my own personal nerves and then become much more personable throughout the entire presentation, because you realize then that people are glued to every word that you have to say, and they've come into your world now. So, even just by starting with story, you automatically warm up the audience and, get them interested in tuning in. The other thing I think that's really important, as we're talking about like presence and giving these kinds of presentations to these unusual, unique audiences, is that we need to be very mindful in just how we speak, the rate at which we speak, and of course the jargon that we're using, the words that we're using. If grandma can't understand the way that you're rattling off about the research that you're doing, then you're not making a connection. And so it's very, these very simple switches in the way that you present, starting with story, speaking very slowly, changing the way that you enunciate, and the pauses, right? The pauses become so meaningful. And so I don't ever think that we are dumbing down the science, and that's certainly not what we're talking about here. It's very much about how can we make the science even more accessible to audiences. And another thing I think we need to do is make sure that there is a point to sharing about the science, and that point goes back to, so why does it matter to me? So what?
Yeah.
And, even like when it comes with, just to share a little tip for you, especially when it comes to data, presenting data. Right. We love our numbers. Data means everything. People still, the general public still question data as belief. Like, oh, this is what you believe. I'm like, no, this is what the data shows. These are the numbers. Yes. But when you present data, you can actually make it even stronger, make a story from it if you present it a little differently. So when you present a single number, this is from principles of like the science of persuasion. Here it is. When you present a single number, you're showing a statistic. When you're presenting two numbers, you show a comparison. Well, a statistic and a comparison don't necessarily move people to do anything one way or another. They said, okay, that's great. Great information. But there's no story to tell from that. If you are presenting data and you have an opportunity to share 3 or more numbers, and especially if they show a trend, suddenly you can get people to take the action that you're hoping for. For instance, if you're trying to get people to minimize their water use, and you say 70% of the people in your neighborhood, or 30% of the people in your neighborhood have decreased the amount of water they've used, then your neighbors will say, good for them. That's great. That still means 70% of the other neighbors don't do anything, so I don't have to do anything.
Right.
But when you present this data instead as, well, last year, 2 years ago maybe, it was 15% of your neighbors saved water. Then it was 20%. Now 30% of your neighbors are sharing water. Whew, now you're showing a trend. Now you're showing that, well, shoot, I better get on board. Otherwise, I'm going to be left out. So even just the way you present numbers can be influential in how you share a story. So
true. And it's not too scientific. It's people can believe that. People can kind of come across as that. That's a huge tip. That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. And this is what people can get from your program. And so if people want to work with you, Paola, how would they go about doing it? I know I have a lot of people in this audience who are very much into science communication. So if people want to kind of get a little bit more information on your program, how can they do that?
Andrew, thank you so much for the opportunity to share this information with your audience. I know you all resonate with this because I know you all care. And remember, it's the UN Ocean Decade. And so what better time to be a better communicator than now? Well, I invite you all to visit our website at www.olapicreative.com. That's OLAPI creative.com. And I also wanted to share that if you send us a message either on there or on Instagram, we're also at Ola'pi Creative on Instagram. I would love to, if you mention that you've heard about our conversation here on the podcast, I'd love to offer you a free 20-minute discovery call so that we can understand what your own communication goals are and point you in the right direction, whether it's a one-on-one media mastermind that you work with us on, whether it's a workshop that you want to bring to your team, or if you're ready to actually produce that video, we're happy to work with you in the messaging and your storytelling and the video production for something like that. So all of that can be found at olapicreative.com.
Awesome. I'm going to put a link to all of those resources that you mentioned so that people can get quick access to it in the show notes. So if anybody wants to check it out, feel free to go in the show notes. Just click on it. If you're on an app, it doesn't matter. On the website, it doesn't matter. You can click on it or tap on it and you can get access there. I highly recommend people who want to get into science communication to check it out. It's a discovery call. You get to answer a bunch of questions, you get to see what the program's all about, and you become a better communicator for it. So, Paola, this has been, look, you and I can probably go on and on and on for about 4 or 5 hours. And I would love to invite you back on so that we can continue to talk about science communication and ocean communication, how important it is, and sort of just dropping tips and things like that people can use to become better science communicators, no matter what they do for their job. And it's so important. I know I talk a lot. I talk more and more. I'm talking to people who are not scientists as a background and still want to talk about the ocean. So just before we go, what would you say would be a quick tip for people who don't have a scientist background but love the ocean so much and are involved in science communication or sort of ocean conservation? They want to get in science communication, but they're like, I'm not a scientist. Can I do this? What would the advice be? Just like one piece of advice that you would give them right off the bat.
Oh yeah, 1,000%. You do not need to be a scientist to be an ocean advocate. In fact, I call you a wave maker. And wave makers are people who talk about their experiences around water, in, on, under, and near water. And at the end of the day, the more that you share about your connection to water and you invite people to water, the more opportunities we have to get people to fall in love with water. And then at the end of the day, they fall in love and they care for that thing. So that's what I advise is don't be afraid to use any of these fun media outlets. Be the communicator, be a wave maker, and share the story. Invite your friends out in the water with you. And that's how we produce more ocean advocates and hopefully more podcasters like you, Andrew.
Love it. Love it. And I agree. We need more podcasters. Everybody's got to connect to their own community. I think it's going to be, and we're seeing it. We're starting to see it, which is great. I love that aspect. Paola, thank you so much for coming on the show and giving us all this knowledge. It's so great. And for me, it's such an exciting opportunity to talk to another science communicator such as yourself, and who teaches others and has so much feedback from people. I'm super excited. I'm gonna be on a high note for the rest of the night. So I appreciate that. And so for anybody who wants to get a hold of Paola and just get more information, go to links in the show notes. Paola, again, thank you so much. Looking forward to having you back on sometime soon. And you have a great day.
Oh, my pleasure, Andrew. I cannot wait to come back because we have so many more ocean science tips to share. So it'll be my pleasure to come back. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paola, for joining us on this How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was so great to have you on. I love it when I connect with guests. I love having guests on. I know we've had a lot of guests on recently. I've been making more of an effort to bring people on, to interview them, to bring their value and to bring their expertise onto the podcast to help you. Because at some point, you can't listen to me all the time. You got to listen to other people. And I learned so much from these interviews, especially this one. I think it's just wonderful. The value of connecting with people in person, or having connections where we talk with people, and they interact with us, ask questions, we can have discussions, and we can strategize, and we can talk about why it's so important to build these strategies and sort of talk over ideas to help us progress in this thing we call ocean conservation, this big challenge that we have. And when we talk about conservation, we talk about communication of this conservation science, we're talking really about behavior change, getting people to understand the ocean, and by doing so, allowing them to make decisions on their own based on the ocean and based on their newfound information, or maybe it's reaffirmed, or they've listened to this information before and it just sort of clicked by the person who's communicating it, and then they change their behavior. That's what we're looking at, and that's what's really important. So I hope you got a lot out of this. I would love to hear from you, your comments or questions, or both, from this. If you just hit me up on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. That's at How to Protect the Ocean. I would love to hear your comments and questions. I think it's just fun. It's just fun to interact with people. It's a huge thing. So love to hear from you. And then, of course, if you want to work with Paola, I'm going to put the links to all of her links in the show notes so you can get a hold of her, and hopefully you can let me know how it goes. But anyway, that's it for today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Thank you so much to Paola. Thank you very much for listening. If you know someone who you think would benefit from this, please feel free to share. It's free to share the link. It's really easy to do these days on your app. All you have to do is just copy link of that episode, text it or send it somehow, DM it to somebody, and I think hopefully they value it and they become a follower and an audience member. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Angela, and have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.